Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, back here to bring you some more of our Benny's Bats section for our MLB DFS action for today, Friday, July 17th. The All-Star break was a nice couple days off for us all, but it's time to get back into action, and it's a really tough slate that we have tonight. There's not a lot of pitchers that you really want to target against. There's not a lot of guys who's there are a lot of guys who have good WOBAs and good ISOs and good batting averages that pop out, but there's not a ton of them together on the same team. So it's going to be a little bit tough today in tournaments looking for guys that you want to, stack some bats up against. But there are a couple guys in each matchup that do stand out. So we're going to go through it as we always do. We're going to give you some of the pitchers. We're going to talk about the weaknesses that the pitchers have, and we're going to try to highlight some of the bats that make the most sense to target that, basically profile as guys who should be doing well against some of those pitchers. So let's get into it. We got a lot to talk about today. We're going to start with the Chicago White Sox game. We got John Danks going up against the Royals. As we all know, Danks is a guy who we want to target right-handed bats against. They're hitting .321 against him this year with 12 home runs and 70 innings pitched. There's really only one guy on the Royals whose numbers kind of stand out against left-handed pitching, and that's Lorenzo Cain. Cain has a .430 WOBA and a .189 ISO. So that's a very good WOBA that he has. Makes him a pretty solid option for your cash game play, especially against a guy like Danks, who has really, really struggled with right-handed bats this year. A lot of the rest of that Royals order is left-handed bats, so they're not guys who really pop out as people that you want to, put into a lineup and target against. You could go with a guy like Alcides Escobar against Danks, but he doesn't have a lot of power. He hasn't been stealing a ton of bases lately. He's basically just a slap hitter that can get you a couple hits. Not going to be a lot of upside for a tournament. Might be a safe option for you to use in cash games, though, if you wanted to. Alex Gordon is another guy. Even though he is a lefty, he does hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Has a pretty decent WOBA, has a little bit of pop, but doesn't have a very high ISO. So, like I said, there aren't a lot of guys that really stand out in this matchup, even though Danks is somebody we usually like to target against. Next guy I want to talk about is Wade Miley. Miley's getting a start today for Boston, going up against the Los Angeles Angels. Right-handed batters are hitting .286 against him with 8 home runs and 73 innings pitched. So they're not dominating him, but they are the way that you want to try to attack him. There's really two guys that stand out on Los Angeles as having good WOBAs and ISOs against left-handed pitching. Obviously, the top option and probably my top option on the day is Mike Trout. If you can fit this guy in your roster, you really want to use him. Has a .464 WOBA against left-handed pitching, which is insane, and also has a .364 ISO to go along with it. He's actually overtaken Chris Young of the Yankees, who we'll talk about later, for the highest WOBA against left-handed pitching so far this year. He's fresh off another All-Star Game MVP, and he's arguably the best player in baseball right now. So if you can find him and figure out a way to fit him into your lineup, I definitely don't think you're going to be upset by doing that at the end of the day. The second guy, though, who stands out is somebody who's going to be lower priced, lower owned, and is kind of flying under the radar, and that's Chris Iannetta. The catcher for the Los Angeles Angels has a .368 WOBA and a .209 ISO. So those are some pretty solid numbers against left-handed pitching for a guy who's, basically available for min price on a lot of sites. I'm hoping he bats somewhere around the 6th hole today for that Angels team. And if he does, he's definitely somebody who I think is going to be in play and that you should take a look at. Next guy we want to talk about is Jorge De La Rosa. He's been unusually tough on right-handed batters this year. He's only allowed a .230 batting average against them. And as we know, that San Diego order that he's going up against is basically right-handed from top to bottom. The only guy who really stands out to me a little bit is as a cheap catcher option. If you want to use a guy like Derek Norris, he's hit left-handed pitching pretty well this year. He's hit left-handed pitching pretty well throughout his career. He doesn't have a huge power number. It's not a guy who I would rely on for a home run. If you're looking for home run upside for a tournament, I don't think Norris is the guy you want to use. But if you need a cheap option for your cash games, I do think he's in a pretty good position. And, I mean, we've actually seen him batting leadoff lately against left-handed batters, so left-handed pitching. So it'll be interesting to see where they do slot him into the lineup today. Again, like I said, I don't think he's a great option for tournaments. I don't see a ton of home run upside or a guy who's going to get you a lot of RBIs to really make up for it. But for a cash game, I definitely think he's a solid option, somebody you can put in there. He's very, very low priced on some of these sites. So if you can get him in there and, get a decent return out of him, I think you're going to be happy with the low price that you have to pay for him. Next guy I want to talk about is Trevor Bauer. Now, Trevor Bauer is going to be a guy who I think a lot of people are going to use on the mound today. He does have that high strikeout upside that basically all the Cleveland Indians pitchers have shown so far this year. The thing with Bauer is he has a little bit of a reverse split situation going on. Right-handed bats over the last couple years have hit him for a higher average and more power. So the two guys who really stand out on Cincinnati against right-handed pitching are Todd Frazier and Joey Votto. So I think Frazier is probably the top play here today. He has a 387 WOBA and a 272 ISO against right-handed pitching. So this is a guy that's been hitting right-handed pitching well and been doing it with power. So if you are looking to put somebody on that Cincinnati team in your lineup today, I definitely think Frazier is probably the best bet. He's in a good hitter's park. He goes up against a pitcher who is a high strikeout pitcher, but has also been tagged for a couple home runs and a decent amount of hits to right-handed batters. So I think he's somebody that you might want to consider. Votto is the other guy against right-handed pitching. 389 WOBA, 236 ISO number. So he's also a solid option to consider. But as we said, Bauer has been struggling more with the right-handed bats. So I think you'd probably want to look more towards Frazier than Votto today in that matchup. Next matchup we have, this is one team that I think you might be able to stack today. And I also think that they might be a little bit lower owned than normal because they're not going up against a horrible pitcher. But the pitcher they're going up against does struggle with left-handed bats. And that's Jordan Zimmermann going up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Zimmerman has allowed left-handers to hit 301 against them this year. And they have a whip of 1 point, and he has a whip of 1.45 against left-handed batters. You know that there's going to be a lot of left-handed batters that the Dodgers are going to throw at him, as well as a right-handed batter or two that absolutely mash right-handed pitching. The one right-handed batter who's been killing right-handed pitching is Justin Turner. Turner has a 455 WOBA with a 291 ISO number. So those are just absolutely eye-popping numbers out of him. That puts him as one of the best sluggers in the league against right-handed pitching. Even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup, he's definitely somebody who I think you might have to consider. The other guys that you got to look at, you have Yasmani Grandal, Adrian Gonzalez, Andre Ethier, and Jock Peterson. 4 left-handed bats. All 4 of them have high WOBAs and high ISO numbers, and all 4 of them are in a pretty decent matchup today with Zimmerman. Now, the park is not the greatest place to be hitting in. It's not like this game is going to be taking place in Coors, but all 4 of those guys have been hitting the ball well, do hit the ball well against right-handed pitching, and I think they're going to go off lower owned than they normally do because I think there's going to be a decent amount of people on Zimmerman, or at the very least, a lot of people who don't want to target any of those Los Angeles bats because they don't want to go up against Zimmerman. So of all the teams that really, stand out and fit well as a team that you might be able to, stack a couple bats together on a team for a tournament, I think the Dodgers is one of those teams that you're going to want to use. If you're playing in cash games, all those left-handed bats are guys that I think might be in play for me. Again, pick out the best ones that you like, the ones that fill in the spots that you need. Grandal at catcher is a guy who is always interesting to me, especially if he's hitting 5th in the order. Adrian Gonzalez is pretty cheap in a lot of spots, so if you can get him cheap in places, I think he's somebody who can be in play. I think he's only like 3,500 over on FanDuel, so that's not a bad price for him over there. Again, he's got 5 home runs in his last 9 games before the break, so you really can't argue. He's starting to swing the bat well again. It would have been nice to see him keep going. I didn't really think that the All-Star break helped a guy like him. He was heating up at the right time going into it, so hopefully he can keep that going moving forward. Next guy I want to talk about, and somebody who I think people are going to be targeting pretty heavily today, is Adam Morgan from the Philadelphia Phillies. He goes up against the Marlins today at Philly. Now, the problem is he struggles with right-handed bats, giving up a 283 batting average with 5 home runs in 11 innings pitched and 8 earned runs overall to start his young career. He did have a decent game first out of the box, and then he's kind of been progressively worse in each one of his starts, culminating with him pretty much getting lit up his last time out. Now, the problem that I have is the guy you really want to use is Giancarlo Stanton, but obviously he's still on the injured list. The other guy who would pop out as a value play would be Jeff Baker, who's another guy who's on the injured list. So really the only other right-handed bat that they have in that lineup that kind of stands out to me is Adeiny Hechavarria. The problem that I have here, it's actually not even really a problem. The more you look at this guy's numbers, he's actually been hitting left-handed pitching very, very well this year. Against lefties, he has a 423 WOBA with a 185 ISO. Now, Morgan is a guy who you kind of want to get some home run hitters against, with Hechavarria really isn't. But again, with a guy with a 423 WOBA against lefties going up against a weak lefty, I think that's going to be a good matchup for him today. He's been batting 3rd in that Marlins order, and his price is still pretty cheap in a lot of places. So if you can get him cheap, I know on some sites he's available as a shortstop, some sites he's available as third base, some sites you can use him in both. So there is a little flexibility with him as well. You can move him around your roster and put him in a good place, and try to get what you want out of him. I think he's going to be a pretty good salary saver. Over on FanDuel, I think he's only like 23 or 2,400. And again, you're going to have to get some of those cheap bets in there if you want to pay up for some of the studs today. I think Hechavarria is a sneaky way to do that. Although, like I said, even though Adam Morgan is a guy who gives up a lot of home runs and Philly's a big home run stadium, Hechavarria is not really a home run hitter. So I wouldn't really be looking for, for the power home run kind of upside with him. Next guy I want to talk about is Charlie Morton. Charlie Morton goes up against Milwaukee. He's given up a 269 batting average with a 148 whip this year to left-handed bats. Last year, it was 243 and 138. And the year before that, it was 312 and 175. So the two left-handed bats on Milwaukee that we've been using to target against everybody lately are Adam Lind and Gerardo Parra. Lind's got a 402 WOBA with a 247 ISO. He always goes a little bit under-owned because he plays that first base position that's so stacked. But in Milwaukee today, it's a good hitter's park. And against a guy like Morton who struggles with, left-handed bats, I definitely think Lind is somebody you can look at. Where he's cheap, I definitely think he's in play. On some sites, he's kind of expensive. I think he might be like the 6th or 7th most expensive first baseman over on DraftKings. And I don't know if I really want to pay up that high for him. For an extra $100 or $200, you can get some bigger names and guys that are in maybe not as good a spot, but just as, pretty close to it, who just have a little bit more overall talent and a little bit more pop in their bat. If you do find him cheap on whatever site you're playing on, no, I definitely think he's a guy you want to consider. Like I said, the other guy is Gerardo Parra. Hopefully, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out because remember, Chris with a K, Davis, is back from Milwaukee now. So Milwaukee's outfield now consists of Braun, Gomez, Davis, and Parra. So obviously, one of those guys is going to have to sit every game in order for the other three to get in there. I think that Parra is going to be in there. He hits right-handed pitching very well. It's the one thing that he's been just absolutely crushing so far this year. His WOBA is 360. His ISO number is only 185. He doesn't have a ton of home run power, although he has been hitting a couple recently, so you really can't argue with him. But he is a guy who racks up a lot of doubles and does get on base, able to score a lot of runs, especially with all the guys hitting behind him who have high batting averages and high on base percentage. You got guys like Lucroy, Braun, Gomez, Aramis Ramirez, depending on how they work it, Chris Davis. So there's some big bats that are hitting behind him that you might want to put in play. If Davis does make it into the lineup today, he is another guy who has actually been hitting pretty well so far this year against right-handed pitching. So he might be another guy who you can put in there as a sneaky low-owned option if you're stacking up bats from that Milwaukee team. The next guy I want to discuss is Mike Leake. Mike Leake goes up against Cleveland. This is going to be a tough matchup for him. His last game, he went out there and threw a gem against the Marlins. I think he wound up with like 39 DraftKings points in his last start, which is absolutely insane. Now, Leake has always been a guy who's been a decent strikeout pitcher. His problem is he does give up a lot of home runs. Left-handed bats are hitting 269 against him this year with 10 home runs in 62 at-bats. So left-handed bats is really how you kind of want to attack him. The one guy who really stands out on his numbers this year is Jason Kipnis. Kipnis has a 424 WOBA with a 184 ISO. The ISO is a little low, so I wouldn't be expecting a lot of pop out of him. But a 424 WOBA is pretty legit. And Kipnis is a guy who's been hitting close to 400 this year against right-handed pitching. So you really can't argue whenever you get him in one of those matchups. There's a couple other guys who might be decent salary-saving options that you can look at. A guy like David Murphy is probably going to be in play. Left-handed bat going up against a right-handed pitcher. He's the left-handed part of that platoon split along with Ryan Rayburn. Usually finds himself in the 4 or 5 spot in that order, and he could have some upside today. Carlos Santana is another one. Michael Brantley is the third guy. But none of those guys really have great numbers that have hopped off the page today. And Leake was pretty good in his last start out there. So the only guy who I'm targeting heavily here today is going to be Kipnis, and only in spots where he's a little bit cheaper. I don't think you want to pay up, top dollar for a guy like Kipnis today because he really doesn't have the home run upside that you'd be looking for to kind of win you a tournament. Next guy I want to talk about is Mike Montgomery. Montgomery's actually been really, really good. If you don't know who this guy is, he's a rookie pitcher for Seattle. He's a left-hander going up against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium today. The Yankees don't hit left-handed pitching all that great. There's two guys on the team that do kind of stand out. The first guy is Chris Young. Now, here's the only problem I have with Chris Young today. Normally, he's been batting in the 2-hole against these left-handed pitching. And up until a week or so ago, he actually was leading the league in WOBA against left-handed pitching. Right now, he's sitting at 449, which puts him a little bit behind Mike Trout. And I think there's somebody else who's ahead of him as well. But off the top of my head, I don't remember who. But he does have a pretty good ISO number as well as 293. So not only has he been hitting left-handed pitching, but he's been hitting it hard. He's been putting up good numbers against lefties, and he's definitely somebody who's in play. But like I said, the problem is when Ellsbury was out, Gardner was leading off, and Chris Young was hitting in that 2-hole. So part of his numbers might have to do with the fact that he was hitting behind Gardner, who was getting on base and causing havoc, and hitting in front of A-Rod, who's the other guy we're going to mention against left-handed pitching in a minute. I don't know where he's going to be in the order today. You would figure that the Yankees are going to have Ellsbury lead off, put Gardner in the 2 spot, and then go with their normal order, which is something along the lines of like A-Rod, Teixeira, McCann. So maybe you get a Chris Young batting 5th instead of McCann, with McCann hitting 6th. Maybe you get a Chris Young batting 6th. McCann could actually even sit today against the lefty. I'm not sure how they're going to go about doing that. But I don't know anymore with Ellsbury back if Young still has the same kind of upside. I think they will try to figure out a way to get him into the lineup today. Like I said, he's been hitting left-handed pitching well, but just be cautious if you're using him. I do think he's a good salary saver. I do think he's a good option, but like I said, there's a little bit of reservation if you can't hear it in my voice. The next guy we want to talk about is A-Rod. He's got a 384 WOBA with a 237 ISO against left-handed pitching this year. Again, he's a right-handed bat. He sees lefties well. He hits lefties pretty well. But again, Montgomery's a guy who's been limiting everybody to, batting averages in the low 200s. He's not a horrible pitcher by any stretch of the imagination. And he's definitely somebody who, I think could pitch a pretty good game today. So I'm not looking to take a lot of Yankees bats against them. But those would be the two that I think that I would be considering. Now, here's something that I wanted to give you guys, just a quick teaching point on the day today. If you don't know, there's been a lot of pitching changes and a lot of teams shuffling their rotations, even to the point where there were guys who, a day or two ago, most of these sites had listed as the probable starter that now aren't going to be starting. And one of those situations is here today. The Los Angeles Dodgers were supposed to be rolling out Clayton Kershaw, but instead of rolling out Kershaw today, they're going to save him for tomorrow and let Mike Bolsinger pitch today. Now, because he was a late sub, depending on what site you're playing on, a lot of those sites might have factored in the pricing of, Kershaw, a lefty, going up and pitching against, this Washington team that he's playing today. So that would mean that you're probably going to see a lot of those left-handed bats at a cheaper price than they normally would be, because they were, basically the sites that factor that stuff in have factoring in that those left-handers were going to be facing Kershaw. Even the right-handed bats in those teams, factoring in that they're going to be facing Kershaw, are probably a few $100s cheaper than they normally are. So far this year, though, the problem is Bolsinger's a right-hander. So you're basically turning everything around. So if you had some of those bats that would have been more expensive against a guy like Kershaw, which I don't think anybody would have been more expensive, even though the splits are in their favor. But like I said, if there were any of those left-handed bats that you want to look at, there's a good chance that they're going to be cheaper than they were if the site that you're playing on adjusts for who the pitcher is on the other side of the mound. A guy like Bolsinger this year has allowed left-handed bats to hit 268 with a 165 whip, as opposed to a guy like Kershaw, who has a career batting average against for left-handed batters that's somewhere down around 200 altogether. So the lefties are in a better spot today. Really, though, the only healthy lefty that you have on that Washington team that is somebody who gets a lot of publicity and somebody that we play a lot is Bryce Harper. Harper's got a 495 WOBA against right-handers with a 391 ISO. And remember, he's a left-handed bat. His price is a little bit discounted, but he's still one of the most expensive options. I'm pretty sure he's the most expensive outfielder on FanDuel. I think on DraftKings, he might be second or third. His price was as high as 58 or 59. It's down to 54. So I guess that's considered a discount. You're getting about 10% off on him. So he's somebody who I definitely think is in play. The problem I have with using Harper lately, though, is because he doesn't have anybody in that lineup really for protection. You got guys like Worth, guys like Rendon, guys like Zimmerman. All those guys are hurt. So really, he has no protection, and teams have kind of been pitching around him. If you look at his game log, he has a walk or 2 walks in just about every one of his last 8 or 9 games. And if teams aren't going to pitch to him and he's just going to rack up a couple walks, it's not not the worst thing if you're going to use him in a cash game, but it really doesn't give you the upside that you need. If you're looking for a home run out of him, you really need teams to pitch to him, and the only way you're going to get a team to pitch to him is if he gets up with runners on scoring position and no open base where you can put him at. Next guy I want to talk about is Irving Santana. This is his third start. His first start, he came out and threw a gem against Kansas City, and then his second start, he came out and got shelled by Detroit. Now, throughout Irving Santana's career, he's been a pretty solid pitcher, but he's always struggled more with left-handed batters. So going up against that Oakland team, you got a guy like Stephen Vogt, 399 WOBA, 253 ISO. So those are some sick numbers to get out of a catcher. And he's in a good matchup today. Not the greatest ballpark to hit in, but good matchup, great numbers, going up against a pitcher who's still rounding himself back into form. I definitely think Stephen Vogt is somebody who you want to put on your short list and put on some of your rosters today. And you guys know whenever I mention Vogt, the other lefty who I love on Oakland is Josh Reddick. Reddick has a 388 WOBA and a 199 ISO. So those are the two guys that I think have a lot of power, should be hitting in the middle of that Oakland order, and are definitely guys that I think you should consider against Santana today. Now, the other option that you can look at is a guy like Billy Burns. He's not going to have great ISO numbers because he doesn't have great power. But what he's really good at, which, there really isn't a stat other than stolen bases to show up on, is stealing bases. So if you're playing over on DraftKings and you want to stack up some of those, left-handed Oakland bats, I think you can put the switch hitting Billy Burns in there for you. I think he's a guy that has a good chance to get a hit or two. And again, whenever he gets on base, he's always somebody that's in play to start stealing. So I think that's somebody that you might want to take a look at today as well. Next guy we're going to talk about, Ubaldo Jimenez. He goes up against Detroit on the road. He's been very good at home, and he's been much worse on the road. He basically has struggled with right-handed bats a little more, which doesn't really make much sense considering he's a righty. But that's really where you kind of want to look and see how to attack him. So the two guys that stand out are J.D. Martinez. He's got a 395 WOBA and a 295 ISO score. So this guy has an absolute ton of power. And a 395 WOBA is not bad either. Basically, what we like to target is anything above probably the 365 range for WOBA is somebody who you want to take a deeper look at. And anything on the ISO side above 200 is something that is pretty interesting to me. So if you have a guy like this, he's got a 375 WOBA and a 295 ISO. He's in a good spot today against a guy who's been struggling with right-handed bats. Other guy I want to just mention briefly is Yoenis Cespes. 378 WOBA, 210 ISO. So he's another guy that you can look for as well. The guy who you really would have wanted is Miggy, who, if you remember, is still hurt, is still out. So you got to kind of look at the secondary options here. I do think that Detroit is going to be able to get to Ubaldo today, especially in their home park. And if they do, I think JD and Cespedes are going to be two of the guys that have the biggest days out of all of them. Next guy I want to talk about is Collin McHugh. McHugh's actually hasn't been horrible. He has a 232 batting average versus left-handed bats this year, but historically that's been where his struggles are. Against this Texas team, there's really two guys that stand out, and they present the dilemma, so we'll talk about that in a second. But the first guy is Prince Fielder. He's got a 425 WOBA with a 175 ISO, so he hasn't been hitting for as much power this year as you would expect against right-handed pitching, but he is getting a lot of hits. He is getting on base. That 425 WOBA is something that's pretty juicy. The problem I have, though, is for a couple $100 less, especially if you're playing in a tournament, you can go down and get his teammate, Mitch Moreland. If you're playing on DraftKings, I think they're both only listed as first baseman, so you really have to make a decision. On FanDuel, I'm pretty sure Moreland's listed as an outfielder and Prince is a first baseman, so you can get them both in your lineup today, but I still think that Moreland is the guy you want to target a little more. He has a 403 WOBA and a 304 ISO number against right-handed pitching. So a 304 ISO number is pretty ridiculous. As we know, this guy's got a lot of power. He's got a couple multi-home run games over his last few. He's seeing the ball real well right now. He's hitting it hard, and he's hitting in the middle of that Texas order. So he gives himself a chance to get a lot of runs, batted in. And he's also playing his game today in a hitter's park. So I definitely think that Moreland's going to be one of those cheap, sneaky guys. He was so under-owned over the weekend that I think he went off at below 1.5% on some of the tournaments I was in on DraftKings. And he was less than 1% on some of the tournaments I was in on FanDuel. I had a lot of him in his last game where he double donged and, basically carried some of my rosters where I made a couple I wouldn't say boneheaded pitching decisions, but definitely didn't take the top guys on the day. Took a few of the cheaper options that didn't perform as well. But the points that I got from a guy like Moreland really made up for it. Next guy I want to talk about, Mikey Fires against the Pirates. 265-ish batting average to both lefty and righties. 12 home runs and 99 innings pitched overall. And it's at Milwaukee, which is going to be, a place that gives up a lot of home runs. The only guy who the numbers really stand out for me is Andrew McCutchen. 384 WOBA and a 217 ISO against right-handed pitching. Now, remember, Fires is a guy who's very feast or famine. He could go out there today and strike out, go 5 innings and strike out 13 guys. But while he's doing it, he could also give up 3 home runs and 5 or 6 runs in the process with a walk or a hit or two, getting on base before those home runs. Like I said, he's very maddening to start a guy like Fires. But you got to think that there is some blow-up potential for him. But again, he could also go out there and throw 5 or 6 innings of shutout ball with double-digit Ks. We have seen him do both of those things in the past. So definitely not something that I think you can look at as certainties for your cash game play. But if you are looking to either use him or target against him in the tournament, I think that his overall level of volatility makes that not the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Next guy I want to talk about is Julio Teheran. He's allowed a 302 batting average to left-handed bats this year with 7 home runs and 45 innings pitched. Now, the Cubs don't really have a ton of lefties. You're looking at a guy like Montero if he's in there catching. You're looking at a guy like Chris Coughlin in the outfield who very likely may be leading off today. The big bat who I think you should target, though, is Anthony Rizzo. 403 WOBA against right-handed pitching so far this year and a 273 ISO. So those are some pretty sick numbers. A lot of people have been shying away from Teheran because he had a very good year last year. But like I said, he's been struggling so far this year. So he's not somebody who I don't think you can play bats against, but I also don't think I want to take 10 or 12 bats going up against a guy like Teheran. The next guy is a little bit tougher for me. That's Matt Cain. Matt Cain is back now. He had missed a good portion of the beginning of the season. Faces Arizona today. This is his 3rd start overall. He got lit up by the Marlins for 5 runs on 7 hits in 5 innings. And then he came back and shut out the Mets over 6 or 7 innings, only allowing 2 hits and, striking out a batter per inning. There's a couple guys on this Arizona team who I still think I'm going to target against them, though. Paul Goldschmidt being the first on the list, 435 WOBA, 261 ISO number against right-handed pitching. So he's somebody I definitely think is in play. Another guy whose name popped up highly on the screener is Wellington Castillo. 399 WOBA, 274 ISO number. So those are some really solid numbers for him, and he's definitely cheap all over. So I think Castillo, Wellington, Beef Wellington as they call him, is another guy who I think you can look at. Is another guy I think is in play. The last guy who I think is a sneaky option for you is David Peralta. Peralta has been batting in the 5-hole against right-handed pitching lately. Has a 359 WOBA, so he's just at that threshold of about 360 that we look for, and a 219 ISO number, which is pretty high for a guy who's a cheap outfield option today. If you're playing in a tournament and you're looking for a cheap outfielder that has that home run upside, home run potential, and home run pedigree, I think David Peralta could be that guy for you. And again, this game is in Arizona as well, not San Francisco, so we could still see some runs here. There still might be some fireworks. Next guy I want to talk about, C.J. Wilson. I mean, what can I say? C.J. Wilson's actually been pretty good this year. The one guy who I really think you can target against him, though, is Hanley Ramirez. Hanley's got a 404 WOBA and a 301 ISO number against left-handed pitching so far this year. Even though C.J. Wilson was pretty good in his last start out, I don't think he's a great pitcher at this point in his career anymore, and I'd be more apt to take a guy like Hanley going up against him, especially if he makes a mistake. The second guy I want to mention, I don't know if he's going to be in the lineup, so make sure you check. There were rumblings that he was going to come back, and before I came on the air and I was reading some stuff, there are now also rumblings that he might not be ready to play or he might just be DHing today. Now, I personally don't care if he just DHs, and neither should any of you for daily fantasy, because we don't get any points for anything he does on defense anyway. It's all about what he does with the bat and his legs. But Pedroia is another one of those guys who's in a good spot. He's got a 383 WOBA and a 222 ISO number against these lefties. So, again, if he's in the lineup and they're saying that he's healthy, I definitely think he's another guy that you might want to consider. Although, keep in mind, he hasn't played in a little over 2 weeks after being on the DL and just coming off of it. The last guy that I'm going to be mentioning is Anibal Sanchez. Again, he's not a guy that I really want to target heavy, but right-handed bats have done much better against him last year and this year. The one right-handed bat that I want to target and one of my favorite plays on the day and almost every day at this point is Manny Machado. Machado has a 385 WOBA number and a 243 ISO. So if I'm taking anybody on that team going up against Anibal Sanchez, Machado is definitely the guy that's on the top of the list. I'm probably not going to mess with many of those left-handed bats. The left-handed bats have really struggled against, against Anibal Sanchez so far this year. The righties have been the guys that have gotten to him over the course of the last couple of years. So that's the way I'm going to roll with it. So that pretty much sums it up today. That's the breakdown of the Benny's Bats section. We wanted to give you guys a short list of guys who are in good spots today that you can start building your rosters around. As always, make sure to come over to the RotoCurve site. Sign up for an account over there if you haven't. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers today. So if you haven't already, make sure you get over to Twitter and follow RotoCurve at RotoCurve on Twitter. You can follow me, Benny Ricciardi, at BennyR11. And you could also follow my partner, Josh Kalachi, who's going to be bringing you our pitching report in a little bit. His Twitter handle is at Josh Kalachi, and his pitching stuff is always very good. I use it myself when I'm doing my rosters to try to narrow down my options. So if you take some of these bats that I gave you with some of the pitching options that Josh gives you and you put it together, we've been able to make some pretty good lineups over the course of the last 2 weeks or so. So hopefully we can keep it going. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today over here at RotoCurve for another edition of Benny's Bats. And as always, stay classy, DFS.